Got a sunburn to peel the daggers off your tongue. Young and dumb, I'm rotting like a bed sore. In a cold case that's never gonna be more than scratching at the walls while you're waiting for a bullet to come. All along I've been treading in the deep end. Throw my mirror in the cupboard for the weekend. Try and put together pieces while I'm dreaming, but nothing's adding up to a thing but a hole in the head.
Have an opportunity here to provide leadership, support, and a voice to the voiceless. The sacrifices that we made during our service do not end here. We carry on. We push forward, and we give hope and inspiration through love, community, and support. Stay free.
Rights and freedoms in this country are absolutely everything to me, because I personally know the sacrifice required in order to get them back once they're gone. So, when my brothers and sisters call stand 2, be sure I'll be there.
Legacy media will play their games, right? Like, this isn't about this or that. This is about freedom, period.
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Brothers and sisters, you know, whether you're a police officer, military, check your hearts. Look where we're going. Man, wake up. I beg you.
If the veterans can't stand up and get a message across to the government, I don't know who can. I don't know. But we're going to give it our best shot. And I think we have a chance to win this and do it. But we need your help. And we need you to come, and we need you to stand too. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
Yes, they're robbing, sold out to the merchant shelves. Minutes after they took out from the bottomless pit, my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We way forward in this generation. Triumphantly, won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs.
Hey, what's up, troops? Jeff Evely, the Magnanimous GenX'er Male. I'm back with you now on this 20th day of March 2024, and I practice radical candor. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say good day to everybody. Shiloh was the first one on the board over on Rumble. Says, okay, Sergeant Major, looking forward to an episode of, quote, days of our lives, close quote. We do live in a sad but true daily soap op where the characters have little to any morals and yet control an entire country. Yeah, sad but true is right. And he also says to have faith in any politician is the same as believing in a fairy tale. Probably worse than believing in a fairy tale, actually. And you know, I'm pretty open about the fact that I'm an atheist around here. So faith, a lot of people use that as a good word. I don't really think of faith as being a good thing. Faith is, you know, in my view, faith is the belief in something in the absence of sufficient evidence or despite all evidence to the contrary. And if you have faith in a politician, then that is obviously a bad thing. But yeah, I try not to believe anything unless I have a good reason to believe it. And there is no good reason to put your faith in the state. That would be basically Nietzsche's prophecy coming true, which it is. I think that he was right when he said the more that we secularize as a society, the more we would put the religious impulse into the state, and basically forecasted communism. And now this side of the Atlantic, it's really our turn to struggle with that. Yeah, it's part of the tribal instinct, I think, to follow leaders who tend to be older than us and to put our faith in the institutions. And that seems to be where it is right now. And it's a very dangerous path, obviously, because the institutions are just people. They're just our fellow primates. They're every bit as susceptible to our baser animal impulses and the darker elements of human nature, So, and power corrupts, absolutely. All right, enough about that. Here is Mother of the Drummers on YouTube says, "Good afternoon, Jeff and chat. It's a sunny, chilly day here in Ontario. Ontario it is. I hope you have a motorcycle, although it is chilly. I saw some guys riding on social media there not too long ago, though. We're getting some good weather early. Rob is saying good morning or afternoon and happy Wednesday. Yeah, it's hump day. Hey, he's giving us the victory and the maple leaf. Thanks for being with us, brother. Darlene says good afternoon, everyone watching from New Brunswick. Thanks for always being with us, Darlene. Leanne says good afternoon, gives us a triple slashy right back at you. Oh, Darlene is letting us know that she shared it. Yes, please, everybody share this out. I can use all the top cover I can get. Rob is doing the same. Cindy says good afternoon, Jeff Hartz. Happy 2-year anniversary to you and Veterans for Freedom, giving us the victory and hashtag winning. Yes, thank you very much. And shout out to Alex Prudhomme for coming up with the idea to get these pins. I think I said that he had them made, but he sent me a correction there this morning or last night. He was like, actually, I just ordered them from the museum. But I was like, okay, well, whatever. It was still a really great idea and a nice gesture. He got these pins for the V4F OGs, the guys who were at the convoy. So definitely a proud moment in my life that I'm sure I'll look back on when I'm an old man. And Alex sent me a note to the same effect. He's really feeling the same way about the whole experience. So yeah, we're definitely worth we're definitely worth commemorating. And Steve is saying, breaking news, fishermen in Newfoundland were trampled by mounted police at the Confederation building this morning. A couple injured, broken bones and such. It was a peaceful protest, but cops did it anyway. Actually, I'm going to be talking about that very soon here. The title of today's program is Death from Taxes with Franco Tarrazano. And Franco is going to be joining me about an hour into the program there, about 1300. So Eastern time, and I'm going to talk about a few other news stories while we wait for him, and I'll try to set him up pretty good here with some of the stuff about taxes and whatnot. And Odious Patton has given us the smash that like button and the triple slashes. Yeah, I'm told it feeds the algorithm. So yeah, thanks for the top cover on that one. And I saw you last night. You were watching the Zach Schmidt podcast, the Schmidt House podcast. I was on there last night. So yeah, appreciate you tuning in. And Tony is here saying Patty Hearst was a rich kind. Okay, right on. And Marion says, good day, everyone. Thanks for always being with us. And Cora says, good morning, troops. It's a beautiful snowy day in Edmonton. Good morning to you, and thanks for being with us. And Colleen is here as always saying, hello, folks. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and dive right into it. Happy hump day to everybody. Here is Ayn Rand. And actually, I had Ayn Rand up on the program here yesterday, but she is one of my favorite authors. And she is a free market capitalist, laissez-faire capitalist, and a defector from the Soviet Union who wrote her magnum opus, which was Atlas Shrugged, all about why, government control of, well, it's basically, she advocates for the separation of economics and state. And I think that's kind of the next stage, the next level we need to achieve here in the Enlightenment. We did the separation of church and state. That was obviously a good thing. Now we need a separation of economics and state. They shouldn't be able to, economic freedom really is essential to living in a free society, because your economics, your money, is you trade your labor for your money. You invest in your time, you bear hardships, you develop skill, you take risks, and that adds value, and you get a return on that investment and risk in the form of money. So money is time is money. And so money is your time on this planet. And if somebody else has control over that, it's functionally slavery, right? It's really just a question of degree. And it is, it's all about emancipating ourselves from mental slavery while others may free the body. only ourselves can free the mind. So yeah, I think that the human story up to this point has been one of self-emancipation from our natural circumstances, and we are naturally a slave master species. So this is all part of the struggle, part of the effort, to emancipate ourselves. And the next stage in that, I think, is economic freedom. It's the separation of economics and state. And okay, so here's Ayn Rand, and she says, in a fully free society, taxation, or to be exact, payment for governmental services would be voluntary, which it is not. It is by force, it's by coercion, it's at gunpoint. You have no choice but to hand your money over to government. If you don't, then there's an escalating series of steps that will be taken to rid you of any freedom. And of course, if you don't comply, then ultimately that gradually escalating series of steps results in a bullet in your brain. So it is functionally at gunpoint, because if you resist the state successfully, their every effort to impose their will on you, then that is what will happen, is you will get shot. So it's not voluntary by any stretch. Government, the state at this stage in human evolution, is still functionally just the dominant gang. It's a socially licensed protection and racketeering, or sorry, extortion and protection racket. And because that's what they do, they come into your life and they say, nice life you've built for yourself here. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. And you pay us for our protection, and you don't really have a choice in the matter. So it's a socially licensed, I say, because of the franchise, because we vote for it, and also because of the Constitution, because of the Charter, because the highest law in the land is that which restricts the government from absolutely abusing us. But of course, that didn't stop them recently in 2022. And we do have a lawsuit that's coming on that one. Eddie Cornell is leading the way, one of our founding members of Veterans for Freedom. And Blair Ector out in Alberta there is the lawyer who's heading that up. And he's also the same guy who got the Emergency Measures Act invocation declared ultra vires. So very promising developments on that front. And but ultimately, the thing is that, I guess what I'm saying here is that the government is essentially a gang, and a lot of the effort, the reforms that need to be brought in are for the purpose of restricting that gang. And that's the only damn thing that gives it any legitimacy, is the fact that it's restricted by law, and the fact that we vote for it. Okay, kind of, right? With China rigging our elections, I mean, is it actually socially licensed anymore? Is it really a government, or is it just back to being a gang? Okay, so here is our meme for the day, and this is Dwight from The Office, and he's just given his Dwight face, and the caption at the top says, quote, "Taxes are the price we pay to live in a civilized society," close quote. False. It says on the bottom, the precondition of a civilized society is the barring of physical force from human relationships, thus establishing the principle that if men wish to deal with one another, they may do so only by means of reason, by discussion, persuasion, and voluntary uncoerced agreement. Yeah, and that's, I often cite Friedrich Hayek from the Constitution of Liberty, when he correctly pointed out that what we mean when we say a free society is that it is free of coercion. But of course, when you have something like an income tax in place, then you can't have a free society. It can't be free of coercion, because the extraction of that wealth is always going to be at gunpoint, and that wealth is your time. It's your time being appropriated by the state, functionally slavery. So, all right. Here is what was just mentioned in the comments there. Thanks for bringing this up. But this is what's going on right now. This was just tweeted out at 8:56 a.m. this morning. Mark Quinn from the CBC saying police clash with protesters at Confederation building this morning. So this is Newfoundland. These are protesters. They're fishermen. And I have the story lined up next. So I'll just go ahead and show the video. But this is what's going on.
We were peaceful. You know like the rocket SWAT team, eh?
Boys don't mind speaking their minds, that's for sure. So now the fishermen in Newfoundland are getting a little taste of, you know, their jackboots, the horses. And this is the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary too. So it just goes to show you, like, this phenomenon, this tyranny, it really, it crosses boundaries, like, between institutions. It's not just the guys who showed up in Ottawa, or just the RCMP, or just the OPS or anything. This is the Royal Constabulary of Newfoundland. So they've gone tyrannical as well. And here is the CBC. Newfoundland government wins injunction against fishermen amid tense protest at Confederation Building. Protests continue to call for out-of-province sales for all species. Okay, so here's what's going on. I guess, I mean, it is, you know, the Canadian Bolshevik Corporation, but here is what they say is going on. Newfoundland and Labrador Supreme Court has granted the provincial government an injunction against fish harvesters who swarmed Confederation Building on Wednesday as part of an ongoing protest over fishery regulations that has led to the postponement of the provincial budget. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is this is kind of reminiscent of what happened in Nova Scotia there, where Strang got an injunction against Freedom for Nova Scotia for protesting, even after Black Lives Matter was allowed to run roughshod over, you know, the mandates and all that stuff. So the province got an injunction to stop Freedom for Nova Scotia from doing a protest, and then that was appealed, and that appeal is moving forward. So hopefully we get some justice in that eventually. But again, like, you know, you see the same phenomenon across all our institutions in the fourth turning. And I'm going to say it's because the boomers are running the institutions. That's what happens in the fourth turning. And that's why we're caught in this 4-generational cycle of tyranny, total war and collapse and rebirth. But anyway, back to the article. The order granted by Justice Robert Stack shortly after noon prevents protesters from blocking the Confederation Building on foot or in a vehicle, and from causing a nuisance by intimidating, threatening, or assaulting public employees. Well, I don't think they're going to be threatening or assaulting them, but they are protesting and, like, blocking access to buildings and stuff. These have all been legitimate forms of protest for a very long time, like up until very, very recently. The application obtained by CBC News says protesters have blocked access to multiple entrances, quote, thus preventing safe entry or exit to the building to carry out their public duties, close quote. I'm pretty sure that CUPE did that, didn't they? When they had the whole public service, went on strike. They were blocking ports and everything. Jason Sullivan, it just goes to show you, like, if you're on the progressive left, if you're progressive, then you can demonstrate, but if you're not, then you're not allowed to protest. Jason Sullivan, former president of the Fish and Food Alliance Workers Unifor Union, which represents the protesting fishermen, told CBC News he isn't sure if the injunction will stop them from showing up Thursday. Quote, Unifor has a ton of money, so I know the government's in a hole, but I guess if they matches up against one another, see who's going to come out on top, close quote. It's a very Newfoundlandese way of saying that. The government announced the budget's postponement earlier this week after protesters blocked entrances to the building, refusing to let government workers inside, and had physical confrontations with police officers and horses. The protester complaining of leg pain and a Royal Newfoundland Constabulary officer have been taken from the scene in an ambulance. Protest organizer John Effort Jr. says he was surprised by the injunction. Quote, I'm a little bit taken aback that there's an injunction against the protest. I thought that was everyone's right to have a peaceful protest, close quote. Yeah, we all thought that. I think a lot of people are saying the same thing. And I think this is going to be one of those things that's going to help a lot more people wake up as well. Like the harder they push, the more they act like a tyrant. That was the whole purpose of that was the purpose that was filled anyway by the trucker convoy. You force a tyrant to act like a tyrant, and that's what's required to wake people up. So I think we're getting a little bit more of that here now. Before the injunction was granted, Effort had called the budget cancellation historic. Quote, and I have a feeling it may be canceled again tomorrow, the next business day, and the next business day until we get what? Free enterprise? Close quote, he said. If fishermen don't get their wish, Efford warned there would be more harvesters on the steps of the Confederation building on Thursday. In a press release issued shortly after 11 a.m., provincial government spokesperson Victoria Barber announced the budget's postponement until further notice. Quote, due to an unsafe environment in which fish harvesters are preventing public service employees from entering the Confederation building complex, close quote. Quote, presently the conditions are unsafe for employees and visitors to the complex, and there is a threat of violence, close quote, says the statement. Based on what? Was somebody actually threatening violence, or is this just something they're saying? CBC News reporters at the scene witnessed an intense exchange between a group of protesters and the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary around 8:30 a.m. Newfoundland time, with officers pushing back from the entrance at the rear of the building. Video from the scene shows public servants struggling to get through the melee and get to work. At one point, Megan McCabe, Director of Communications for Premier Andrew Furey, tried to get through the crowd, but was pushed back by a pair of irate protesters hurling expletives. Quote, get back, don't be stupid, close quote, one yelled as McCabe walked backward away from them. Asked about confrontation with McCabe, Effort said, quote, you will always find someone to incite a person and cause something to try and damage their cause, close quote. Effort defended the conduct of protesters and said the weeks of demonstrations have been nothing but peaceful. Quote, we've been at this now for 3 weeks. We've had no issues with security. We've had no issues with police. We've even, when we leave at the end of the day, we make sure we pick up our garbage, close quote. Sound familiar? Sounds a lot like the trucker convoy. Protesters pleaded with police and to not let the public servants inside. Quote, if you're going to let them in, you're going to cause trouble for yourselves. And that we will guarantee, close quote, said one protester to an officer. Jason Spengel, Secretary-Treasurer of the FFAW, said members of the union want to be able to go to work the same as employees at Confederation Building. He said it was regrettable that an RNC officer and a protester who Spengel said broke his hip were hurt. Quote, if they are working like all of you folks here, and it is unfortunate that someone took too much of a situation there. Close quote. The RNC Constable James Cadigan confirmed to CBC News one officer was injured at the protest and has been taken to hospital for treatment of undisclosed injuries. Quote, our priority remains the safety of all at present, close quote, said Cadigan. Spengel said public servants were trying to push their way into work. I think that's probably dumb, crossing the picket lines and stuff like that. That's not usually how public servants conduct themselves in these situations. Quote, one said, where do you think your EI comes from? In a vindictive way. I mean, shame. It's disgraceful that we got someone working in this building that would make that comment. It's a shame, close quote. So a public servant said to a seasonal worker, where do you think your EI comes from? Not exactly tactful. Okay. The fishery generates a lot of money for the province, said Spengel. Quote, we need to make sure the balance of that wealth is shared fairly, and that we put forward to the ministers yesterday what John Effort put forward to the ministers yesterday was more than fair, close quote. In an earlier statement, Barber said they are, quote, respectfully, close quote, asking the fish harvesters to allow employees, media, and guests into the building, quote, so budget 2024 can be delivered as planned, close quote. Is this the new term here? I'm just a sidebar. The fish harvesters, they used to be called fishermen. Is this the new progressive politically correct term for fishermen? Because I know they were floating that fisher folk thing on the House of Commons there, in the floor of the House of Commons just last year. So the fisher folk, I think, maybe landed flat, and now they're going with fish harvesters. I'm not sure, but it's just a thought. The hundreds of protesters are fish harvesters and supporters who have been lobbying government to open markets to outside buyers since early March. As it stands, they can sell their catches only to buyers inside the province at a price agreed upon by the FFAW and the Association of Seafood Producers. Yeah, that sounds like socialism, a controlled market, right? And it's obviously the lucrative merger of corporation and state, i.e. fascism. The chaotic scene began before sunrise when Royal Newfoundland Constabulary officers on horseback pushed back protesters as they moved toward the building around 6:30 a.m. Newfoundland time. Quote, "Stay back," close quote, police yelled at the group. Quote, "Is this a public building?" Close quote, one responded. Quote, "Don't we pay for this building?" Close quote. Yeah, you pay for the police salaries as well. And, it's their duty to protect the public. So, well, that I guess, maybe not everybody understands that right now. They seem to be protecting the powerful in all situations. Quote, "We're tired of being kept down," close quote. "Protesters have vowed to stay there all day." Quote, "We just want the right to sell our product where we can," close quote, said Alfred Fitzpatrick, a fisherman from Burin Peninsula. Quote, "They never go to Nova Scotia and tell the crowd up to the Annapolis Valley, you can only sell apples in Nova Scotia. Why are you telling us we can only sell fish here in Newfoundland?" Close quote. Yeah, that's a good point. Good question. Fisheries Minister Elvis Lovelace says he's willing to meet some of the demands tabled by the harvesters, and his department has issued an expression of interest for outside buyers of the 2024 snow crab fishery. Just get out of the way. I think, and that is one of the things I find about, because the thing is, like, if you're a farmer, you're a businessman, and, your farm, it's its own business. But when it comes to the fishermen, they're basically employees of the fisheries department. And so why is it that we have the government control over this one particular sector, but not over others? It doesn't seem to be producing good results, that's for sure. But harvesters say their protest is not just about crab. They want similar restrictions lifted on the sale of all species they catch. Fitzpatrick said he felt Lovelace's statements were a, quote, stall tactic, close quote, as crab season approaches. Quote, "We're tired of being kept down," close quote, he said. Quote, "We've got a government that's sitting by and letting it happen, and a union is being too complacent over the years. And this is why we're in the state we're in, but we're here and we ain't going nowhere," close quote. Yeah, and I think we've seen unions failing the people they represent across Canada over the last several years. The protests have caused also commotion inside the House Assembly during the current legislative session. The harvesters have taken to the public gallery and refused to heed warnings to sit down and be quiet, leading to Speaker Derek Bennett removing them from the chambers. They've also blocked off provincial fisheries buildings in St. John's, preventing employees from going inside. Okay, so that's what's going on. Another protest being crushed. Another union failing the people that it represents. Another police department going tyrannical. So all very part and parcel, I think, for the times through which we are now living. Okay. Here is a protest that is allowed to happen. And this is a look back, but Ellie Shanton Nantel, this is from March 9th. Massive angry anti-Israel protest happening in Ottawa. So I'm just showing you a little compare and contrast here because I think this demonstrates my point. Hamas is part of the global progressive movement, according to Judith Butler, who's a seminal third wave feminist author and thought leader in the progressive movement. And the thing is that progressivism, in my view, in my assessment, is a movement that advocates for the destruction of the West. And so if you're pro-Hamas and advocate for the destruction of the West, then you're allowed to demonstrate. But if you're pro-Western and advocate for a return to Western values and the rule of law, then you're not allowed to protest. But here is this demonstration. Get a load of that. Holy smokes. Yeah, X has been giving me troubles with the video playback here, guys. Just let me give that a refresh for you, and we'll try it again.
Shut it down!
There you go. Massive demonstration. I couldn't even tell you how many people. Streets are flooded, blocked off in Ottawa there. Cora was just saying, where are the jackboot? Where are the horses? They have 4 jackboots instead of only 2. And Patricia's saying there are going to be a lot of horses on April 1st. Yeah, that's the big carbon tax rally there. So that would be not next Monday, but the one after that. I'm just looking at my calendar here. Yeah, April 1st would be a week from Monday. Hopefully, we get a good showing out for that. And Serena was just saying, Buddhists looking into getting into lobster farming in PEI appears they have purchased, many businesses where they choose to reside in PEI, quietly taking over land and businesses. Yeah, that's something I've talked about here several times in the past, and I should do another update on this very soon because there's always more information rolling in about it. But the Buddhist temples in PEI, there are massive Buddhist temples in there, and those kinds of temples are reputed to serve as command posts for United Front, and there are all kinds. Like there's a huge student program for the student. They bring students in through PEI. From China as well. There are all these business relationships, tons of Chinese-born who are serving on multiple councils all over the place, the hospitals, the community councils, these business consulting firms, and they're just freaking taking over PEI. I think PEI is a really soft target, about 160,000, I think, population. And what they have like 4 electoral seats there as well, the ridings. It's probably a pretty soft target and a high value one at that for the Chinese Communist Party and their continued soft coup here in Canada. So PEI, I'm very concerned about PEI. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, and here's another demonstration. Speaking of progressive demonstrations in which you are allowed to engage, Elon Musk is tweeting out most reasonable people, because they are reasonable people, cannot believe that the goal of the far left is to end America. Yes, it is. That's what progressivism is all about. It's about destroying the West.
You're over here appropriating a space for your own personality.
I'm a journalist.
You're not a journalist.
How do you decide who's a journalist?
I mean, considering I was fired as a journalist, you're no journalist.
Literally, would you rather be itchy or sick your whole life?
So he's not a journalist either. I was fired for being a journalist, so he's not a journalist.
We're not doing this for what the actual conversation is, which is getting rid of this country.
Getting rid of this country?
Getting rid of America, getting rid of the West. This is what this is for.
You want to get rid of America?
Yes. Everyone here understands that at some level we need to get rid of America completely.
What should we do?
Decolonization, land back.
Where should we go, though?
In our communities. We need to go leave the capitals, leave the central capitals of commerce, of capital itself. You're over here appropriating a space for.
They don't know, and this is obvious from a lot of the writings of the Frankfurt School and early Marxist writings when they openly say, like, we have a plan to tear the system down, but we don't actually have a plan for what we're going to establish in its place, for what's going to replace the current system. So all they know is they just want to destroy, and that's all the left can do is destroy. Patricia's pointing out the Chinese have owned a lot of fish plants in the South Shore for a long time, herring, scallops, it's roe, etc. Yeah, the South Shore of Nova Scotia is what she's referring to there. We have the same problem in Nova Scotia, and I think they bought up one of the they bought up one of the companies there in Halifax that buys a lot of the catch too. There was a CBC story that I showed here, like, I don't know, a year ago now, something like that, where the Nova Scotia fishermen are complaining that they're not getting a fair price for their catch anymore. And some people express some concern about the fact that the Chinese own the fishery essentially at this point. And when the CBC interviewed the Chinese owner, he was like, it's very racist. I think it's racist that you might be concerned. Okay, I just switched to a Brooklyn accent. But that is the tactic of the Chinese Communist Party. Anytime anybody who represents even the slightest bit of an impediment to their agenda of global domination, they just call them a racist. And mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most racist of them all? Well, it's Donald J. Trump, right?
For your own person.
The single greatest impediment to the Chinese Communist Party's agenda. Okay, here's a little bit of the counter-revolution. And I thought this was really interesting because as the regular watchers will understand, I talk about the fourth turning and how the real revolution is generational and the boomers must be stopped. Around progressivism, like Hamas is part of the global progressive movement. And the counter revolution is really centered around Gen X. Gen X are the counter revolutionaries in the generational revolution. It was what's his name there? Gavin McInnes. He's a Canadian living in New York there who founded the Proud Boys. And he said a long time ago, he was like, conservatism is the new punk rock. Well, it's the same generation rebelling against its next elders, the boomer generation, the most progressive generation. And so we tend to lean more right in Gen X. And here's some counter-revolutionary stuff from David Draymond, the lead singer of Disturbed. So if you're just listening, David Draymond just walked out on stage with a massive flag that's got F Hamas on it. And the F word is spelled with an American / Israeli flag here. So David Draymond taking a pretty bold position on this. Cindy's saying one of my favorite bands. Yeah, if you haven't seen Disturbed live, oh my God, you gotta make that a bucket list item. I saw them at Rockfest in Florida when I was posted down there, and they were phenomenal. All right, what a way to kick off a show. Pyrotechnics and all there. Yeah, I gotta love these guys. So I thought that was interesting, man. David Draymond coming out like that. Okay, here's Warren Kinsella, and he says the Trudeau Liberals were lying liars who lie. # Canadian Polly. Yeah, so here's what's going on that front too. So I reported on this, I think, yesterday, and it was it says Canada to halt arms sales to Israel after non-binding vote in House of Commons. Yeah, so that was yesterday. The NDP introduced this motion to declare a genocide and recognize the Palestinian state. And the whole time I'm looking at this, I'm like, did these people realize that the government of Canada governs Canada and not the Middle East? Like, they can vote all they want, they can pass all the motions that they want. It's not going to make a lick of difference because they're not the government of the Middle East. They're the government of Canada. So not within their sphere of control, not even a little bit. And there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing any of us can do about what's going on over there. So it's a lot of, I think, wasted effort for a lot of people and a lot of emotional investment. Holy smokes. So here the title on this graphic that he's tweeting out here says Canada to halt arms sales to Israel after non-binding vote in House of Commons. Parliamentary motion from New Democratic Party passed with support of Liberals, Bloc Québécois, and Green Party, all the progressives. And it was ultimately an empty virtue signal. The reality, quote, Global Affairs Canada can confirm that Canada has not received any requests and therefore not issued any permits for full weapon systems for major conventional arms or light weapons to Israel for over 30 years, close quote. The department told Al Jazeera in an email on Friday. So I was talking about this yesterday, and I was like, man, you talk about an empty virtue signal. That's entirely what this is. Like the NDP actually put that motion forward, and it was, initially, I think it was to declare genocide and recognize Palestinian statehood. And then the Liberals took it and they they basically rewrote it, and instead of like Canada declaring a ceasefire, it was more like they should return the hostages, and a totally empty virtue signal. So now they're saying the one thing that they did put out there that apparently had some teeth, the crown jewel in all this, was that they're not going to sell arms to Israel anymore. When here we weren't doing it anyway. That hasn't been going on for the last 30 years. So well done, everybody. Way to virtue signal. Now, here's True North. Canadians worried about government presenting itself as, quote, authority, close quote, on truth. Yeah, that's Orwellian. Whatever serves the regime is true. And that is essentially what we're living through right now. But it just hasn't been completely formalized yet. All right, here's the article. A focus group of Canadians told Canada's Cyber Intelligence Service not to stray too far into pushing an agenda and present itself as an authority on truth when questioned about a media campaign to combat disinformation. In a recent study conducted by Ecos Research Associates on behalf of the Communication Security Establishment, Canadians expressed reservations about the government's approach to combating disinformation. The study, titled, quote, Study on Online Disinformation Advertising Creative Testing, 2023-24, close quote, aimed to gather insights to refine the CSE's advertising campaign strategy. Why is the CSE, the Canadian Security Establishment? That's what it is, right? The Communication Security Establishment. That's CSE. Like, they deal in cybersecurity and crypto and all this kind of stuff. But why the hell are they even looking into this? Like polling and public opinion. It's strictly like a geek job. So. CSE's campaign seeks to educate Canadians about the nature of disinformation, its creators, and their motives. To do this, the agency deployed various ads directing individuals to a campaign landing page for further information on the subject. The study, which cost taxpayers $45,192, organized 8 online focus groups comprised of participants from various regions across Canada. These groups discussed different concepts proposed for a campaign and provided feedback on their suitability for the target audience. Among the key findings, some Canadians were concerned that the government was going too far with its efforts to rein in disinformation. Quote, they are the source of most of the disinformation, so I could see how people would be skeptical about that. Quote, a number of participants expressed reservations about the government presenting itself as an authority on disinformation, perceiving that the government of Canada would be declaring what was true or not, or cautioned that an authoritative tone would reduce the likelihood that some Canadians would go to or use the website to learn more, close quote, researchers wrote. Quote, many emphasize the need for neutral presentation of examples of what to look for and how to fact check, being careful not to use this as an opportunity to further an agenda. The real answer here is educational reform, in my view. We should be teaching philosophy in schools, as in teaching people how to think instead of telling them what to think. Because now it seems like all they do is they just turn back to the institutions and like, tell me what to think, please. Somebody tell me what to think. Very dangerous territory that we're wading into here. Quote, many emphasize the need for neutral presentation of examples of what to look for and how to fact check, being careful not to use this as an opportunity to further an agenda. Around the same time the study was conducted in September of 2023, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly pledged Canada as a leading signatory to United Nations initiative to fight disinformation globally. The document calls on signatory countries to take, quote, necessary and appropriate measures, including legislation to address information integrity and platform governance, close quote. I think the real key here is to educate critically thinking individuals so that they're better able to discern truth for themselves and stop expecting the government to tell them what to think. Okay, speaking of trusting the government to tell us what's true, here is things I think when I'm stoned. He's pretty good on Twitter or X, whatever. He says, there are 5 judges with vaginas on the Supreme Court. Yeah. Oh, there it's doing that thing again. Bear with me, guys. I don't know if there's... any kind of a connection to an update that I did on this thing, or what's the deal? But here we go.
Case that it was problem. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled in a recent sexual assault case that it was problematic for a lower court judge in the case to refer to the alleged victim as a woman, and that they should have used more appropriate language like person with a vagina. A case in which it should be noted that did not involve any transgendered individuals. In the last couple of years, we've heard progressive leftist institutions refer to women as people who menstruate, or birthing persons, or pregnant people, and now people with vaginas. The progressive leftist ideology uses just slightly more polite language to define women as bleeders, breeders, or cunts, and then they tell you it's conservatives that hate women.
Yeah, pardon the language there, ladies. I know a lot are sensitive to the C word, but I think that was a pretty well bottom line there. And Stephanie is asking, who is this guy? You know, I don't know him personally, but he's a good guy to follow on Twitter. It's at thinks I thinks. Okay, but he's pretty good, and he does these kind of 1 minute clips that are pretty succinct and to the point, so not bad. Okay. So speaking of, our institutions telling us the truth, here is Time Magazine. And the title of the article is Canada's right is moving further right and closer to the U.S. Ooh, the U.S. Oh, my God, the big, scary U.S. And this has been going on, basically since the Trudeau regime rose to power, where there's they're polarizing us against the United States, our closest ally, biggest trading partner. Like, there have never been two countries with a closer relationship in the history of the world than Canada and the United States. We even have a binational command structure with NORAD, and that's the only binational military command structure in the history of the world. I think it serves China's interests that we're polarizing against the Americans. And there's this undercurrent, a strong one at that, of anti-Americanism in Canadian culture, or at least in the progressive culture, that's for sure. But here's a nice picture of somebody. I don't know if this is from the Freedom Convoy or what it is, but it's in Ottawa, and they have that dual can U.S. flag they're flying there. I really like seeing that at the trucker convoy, because all you get from the media is how anti-American Canadians are, but it just isn't the case. If you're at the trucker convoy, you know that that's just not true. Okay, here's the article. In late January, Tucker Carlson visited Canada, meeting with influential Canadian politicians and political commentators. Speaking at an event hosted by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, he mocked Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in front of thousands of Canadian spectators. But why did a media personality known for courting the far right in the U.S. visit Canada to comment on its politics? And why did he have such a strong support base there? And it's, of course, ridiculous that Tucker Carlson is courting the far right, or these far right in any way. He's been a mainstream commentator his entire adult life. So it's not the right that's moving farther right. Obviously, it's the left that has gone completely off the deep end. And they're looking at the right going, look how far you guys are. And we're over here like, we haven't moved. It's you guys. Okay, here's the rest of the article. Canada and the United States have different forms of government, but close political ties. But for decades, U.S. commentators have struggled to parse out the ideological differences, for example, between Canadian Liberals and Conservatives, as they don't align with the ideological differences between the U.S. Democrats and Republicans. Well, yeah, that's because the Republicans are actually on the right wing and the Democrats are on the left wing, whereas in Canada, all of the political parties are on the left wing. With the exception of the PPC, but of course they still have to win a seat. So they're referring to our mainstream political parties, obviously. And the thing here, like, they open with this paragraph with Canada and the United States have different forms of government, but close political ties. Well, different forms of government, like, how different are they really? They're both founded in the tradition of English common law. They're both democratic, representative democracies, I guess I should say. The United States is a constitutional republic. in the sense that it's not a pure democracy. They have the electoral college system, which is supposed to be a bulwark against tyranny in the form of the Hunger Games. It's what keeps the United States from becoming the Hunger Games. But who do we resemble more in terms of our political system than the United States? I mean, other English common law countries, obviously, but it doesn't get much closer than Canada and the United States, both in terms of politics and culture. Since the 1980s, though, the right in the United States and Canada has worked to strengthen its relationship. More recently, far-right groups in both countries have found common ideological ground that helps empower right-wing leaders and supporters in both countries, which, they're always accusing us of what they themselves are guilty. The left has been doing this for a hell of a lot longer. Barack Obama endorsed Justin Trudeau. The first person that Trudeau called during the pandemic was Hillary Clinton. And of course, that's who you call when you want to cover something up, not when you want to respond to an emergency. In the mid-20th century, Canadian political leaders worked to create a national identity that was independent of Britain and the United States. The Canadian conservatism had long defined itself in opposition to the United States and its imperialism, while the Liberal Party had traditionally encouraged economic integration and cooperation between the two countries. That changed when nationalist movements in English Canada in the 1960s broke from this tradition, and Liberal leaders also worked to craft an identity in opposition to their southern neighbor. They criticized the imperialism and the racism in the United States that they claimed did not exist in Canada and encouraged economic distancing between the two. That is the commie narrative that the progressives have been spewing for the longest time, the imperialism and racism of the United States. And like I've been saying, this is Chinese Communist Party's narrative. The imperialism really started with the Russian narrative back in the 50s, especially around colonialism, and it really views the whole colonialist experience through that Marxist lens of oppressor oppressed, in order to exacerbate perceived grievances around colonialism. And the racism narrative really took hold in the United States because of the slave trade that was briefly there in the United States. Not that it wasn't everywhere else in the world all throughout history up until the United States fought a war to end it. It's more complex than that, but that was, I think they were the third country in the world to ban slavery. The first being the Netherlands, and then Britain after that. Which, it wasn't like there were a lot of slaves in the British Isles either. That was mostly because of the slavery in the colonies that the indigenous peoples participated in, by and large. So this is a narrative, the racist, imperialist West, broadly speaking, especially the United States, because they are the only thing standing in the way of global tyranny. Now this narrative has been imported to Canada, and we're even more racist than the United States, perhaps. Well, I don't think we're more racist than the United States in the progressive paradigm, but we definitely have a huge problem with racism, according to them, because they're Chinese communists. Just as Canadians were forging a new sense of national identity, Americans became more interested in Canada's internal politics. Liberal Pierre Trudeau was elected as Canada's Prime Minister in April 1968 and became the country's first leader to reach a, quote, celebrity, close quote, status outside the country. But Trudeau encouraged distancing Canada from the United States, not just in ideology, but in economic ties. While the U.S. had an embargo against Cuba following the Cuban Revolution, for instance, Trudeau strengthened ties between the country and Canada, declaring, quote, "Long live Cuba and the Cuban people. Long live Commander Fidel Castro," close quote. Yeah, that commie bastard. Everything's really went downhill with that guy. And I can still remember how the crowd at Pierre Elliott Trudeau's funeral applauded Fidel Castro when he showed up to his state funeral in Ottawa. So that I think says a lot about just these concentrations of progressivism in the population centers, the cities, the cosmopolitan cities. Okay. Yet it was not his socially progressive policies, economic partners, or even romantic partners — he briefly dated Barbra Streisand, 23 years his junior, that got the most U.S. attention. In October 1970, Trudeau made headlines across the world after he gave the federal government the power to suspend civil liberties under the War Measures Act for the first time in peacetime. Under this act, Trudeau declared a state of, quote, apprehended insurrection, close quote, in Quebec after members of the Front de Libération de Québec kidnapped the deputy premier of Quebec and a British diplomat after hundreds of bombings and robberies around the province that left 6 people dead. Major U.S. media outlets reported on the crisis. In December 1970, the New York Times published a multi-page interview with Trudeau, attempting to understand how a socially progressive leader like Trudeau could take such action. Well, that's because progressives are tyrannical. The further left you go, the closer you get to totalitarianism. So it's not surprising coming from a progressive leader like Trudeau at all. Not in my view. But I guess you would have to be a progressive to be so utterly lacking in self-awareness. As the subheading for the interview asked, quote, did Canada's notably cool Prime Minister overreact to the threat of a minuscule Quebec terrorist underground, close quote. The U.S. media struggled to reconcile Trudeau's image as a progressive liberal leader with his actions under the War Measures Act. As those on the U.S. and Canadian left struggled to find common ground, the 1980s saw closer ties between the Canadian and U.S. right. When Canadians voted Conservatives into power in Parliament in 1979, it resulted in the first Liberal defeat in 16 years. Though Trudeau served as Prime Minister for another term after this, the 1984 election of Brian Mulroney resulted in Canadian Conservatives embracing policies that were further to the right, growing closer to the ideology of the right in the United States. Brian Mulroney implemented the GST. That's not exactly, a right-wing policy. That is more statist and less individualist. In a reverse strategy of decades past, the Mulroney aimed to strengthen the relationship between the two countries and raised awareness of Canadian politics in U.S. media. Just months before the 1984 Canadian federal election, President Reagan even invited him to the White House, holding a joint press conference despite the Liberals still being the party in power in Canada at the time. Just as Mulroney hoped, Americans were paying attention to Canadian politics, and he was able to forge closer relations with the United States. Mulroney worked closely with Reagan's successor, President George H.W. Bush, even giving the eulogy at his funeral in 2018. But as Mulroney's government worked closely with the U.S. Republicans, they still remained ideologically distant on many issues. Mulroney, for instance, drew criticism from Reagan for imposing sanctions against South Africa during apartheid. But in the 1990s and early 2000s, conservatives in Canada, and particularly conservatives in Alberta, pushed the Progressive Conservative Party further to the right. In 2003, it joined with another Conservative Party, creating what is now the Conservative Party of Canada. That would have been the Alliance. So, the progressive conservative is an oxymoronic statement. Conservative is ostensibly a right-wing ideology, but progressivism is decidedly a left-wing ideology. So those are mutually exclusive views, and really what the modern conservatives are is they're progressive conservatives. So they're still socialist Democrats, just like everybody else in Canada. It's just that they want to get to the tyranny slower and with lower taxes. So back to the article. Now, as the Canadian far right has gained more power domestically, these connections have deepened. In 2022, a trucker convoy over the downtown of Canada's capital, Ottawa, to protest the vaccine mandate for truckers across the Canadian-U.S. border. The trucker convoy itself seemed to signal how ideologies of the U.S. and Canadian right had converged. It also strengthened financial ties between far-right conservatives in both countries. Many who donated to the trucker convoy through crowdfunding website had U.S. addresses. When GoFundMe took down the convoy's donation page, U.S. Republicans such as Ron DeSantis and Jeff Landry protested the move, demanding immediate refunds to U.S. donors. In a sample of a 12-hour period, where donations totaled over $500,000. One news agency estimated that over half of the identifiable donations came from south of the border. In this way and others, the far right in the United States is helping to empower the far right in Canada. The ideological gap between the Liberals and Conservatives in Canada is growing larger as the far right gains more influence in the Conservative Party. All the while, despite significant differences, such as their positions on abortion and gun control, the Conservative and U.S. Republican parties grow closer. together, and a move that is being championed by the far right on both sides of the border. A week after Tucker Carlson's visit, the Conservative Premier Smith's government banned gender-affirming care for children under the age of 15 in the province of Alberta. Wow, that's a really far-right policy, wouldn't you say? Protecting children is far-right. That's all it takes these days. Prime Minister Trudeau observed that, quote, the most anti-LGBT policies of anywhere in the country, close quote, had passed 1 week after Carlson visited the province, condemning Premier Smith's decision. In fact, the Liberal Party frequently compares the Conservative Party to Republicans, even claiming that Conservatives are embracing quote-unquote MAGA policies. Yes, please. And I think Trudeau had that quote there recently where he was saying they want to make Canada great again. That's not what Canadians want. Yeah, just keep talking, man. Just keep talking, because more people are waking up every day the more you talk. The United States and Canada share the world's longest international border. Their histories and futures are intertwined. Their governments have worked to have close diplomatic ties. But as voters in both countries prepare to go to the polls in the next few days, they would do well to focus on domestic issues rather than use the country's politics as a means to empower their own, and be wary of those who try to do so. Oh, big, scary right-wingers. It's also very scary and racist. But you know, I mean, they're always accusing us of what they themselves are guilty. I think the reality is that the politics of the Democrat Party have been imported by the left in Canada, by progressives, and there is a reaction to that we're seeing right now that they're trying to tie to the United States. Okay, so without further ado, folks, I think I'm going to go ahead and bring our guest in here to we're going to be discussing a few different issues, all kinds of stuff that's going on out there with corruption and overspending and overtaxation in Canada right now. Franco Tarrazano, welcome to the program, sir. How you doing this morning?
Hey, I am doing great. Busy as always here in Ottawa as they get ready to jack up your taxes again.
Yeah, no kidding. So I guess we have the April 1st is going to be the big Axe the Carbon Tax protest nationwide. And you guys have been very active in that space all over the carbon tax debacle. So do you want to bring us up to speed on where you guys are with that?
Yeah, well, let me dive into the carbon tax in more detail, but let me just start off with what's going on on April 1. Like, in a couple of days, the very same day, the federal government is raising the carbon tax, raising alcohol taxes, and guess what, folks? Also giving members of parliament another pay raise. So on the very same day that they take more money out of your wallets, they're going to be stuffing more money into their own. Isn't that nice?
Typical, I would say. So yeah, they're due to get a pay raise on the same day that they're doing all of this. And so, but you guys, I know that you were in committee not too long ago, and you're calling for the MPs to vote against the carbon tax. And then just as of this morning,
good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules.
We saw Pierre Poilievre. I think I got some noise in the background there, guys. But Pierre Poilievre came out just this morning, and he announced this.
So now, today I am announcing that I'm giving Trudeau one last chance to spike his hike. One last chance and only one more day. Today I'm announcing that if Trudeau does not declare today an end to his forthcoming tax increases on food, gas, and heat, that we will introduce a motion of non-confidence in the Prime Minister. It will read that the House declare non-confidence in the Prime Minister and his costly government for increasing the carbon tax by 23% on April 1st as part of his plan to quadruple the tax while Canadians cannot afford to eat, heat, and house themselves, and call for the House to be dissolved so Canadians can vote in a carbon tax election.
All right. So what do you think, Franco? Progress?
Well, Well, look, I think there's been mounting opposition to the carbon tax, rightfully so. I mean, not only are you seeing the Conservatives in the House of Commons absolutely hammer the carbon tax and the carbon tax hike, but folks, like, you're getting provincial politicians of all political stripes opposing the carbon tax and opposing the carbon tax hike. Like, you even have the Liberal premier out there in Newfoundland and Labrador who's calling out the Trudeau government and calling on Trudeau to not raise the carbon tax again. So you're seeing opposition all across the board. Like, even in Alberta, you have these NDP leadership hopefuls saying that the carbon tax is dead. Even the NDP politicians who first brought in a carbon tax in Alberta are now calling for the carbon tax to be scrapped. And the reason why that now you're seeing these politicians take on this fight is because Canadians are sick and tired of it, right? It's the opposition among Canadians that is now forcing these politicians who want to, stay in their jobs that are now fighting the carbon tax. So it's great to see Poilievre continue to put pressure on the federal government. But let me also just detail why Canadians are so fed up with the carbon tax hike. Number one, the carbon tax is so disastrous in an economy, right? Not only does it make it more expensive for you to fuel up your car, not only does it make it more expensive for you to keep the lights on and the heat on during the winter, not only does it make it more expensive for you to go to the grocery store and buy food, but the carbon tax trickles its way throughout the entire economy. From the beginning of when farmers need natural gas and propane to heat their barns and dry their grain, to when truckers got to fill up their big rigs with diesel, to when businesses have to buy those inputs, have to use natural gas to keep their heat on. So the carbon tax hits you all along the way, right? And what you hear from this federal government is essentially insulting Canadians' intelligence, right? The federal government claims, oh, the rebates, you'll be better off. But that's not correct. Even the government's own budget watchdog shows that the carbon tax is costing Canadian families hundreds of dollars more than what they get back in rebates. I see you have the PBO report there. If you scroll down to the Alberta table, it shows that the carbon tax will cost the average family $911 more than what they get back in rebates. And folks, the Trudeau government wants to crank up their carbon tax every single year, meaning that cost is only going to go up and up and up and up. And Jeff, I know I'm kind of on this rant, but just give me a second here to explain,
by all means,
even if you set aside the data, how ridiculous of a claim the federal government is making here, right? Because not only are they charging a carbon tax, they charge their sales tax on top of the carbon tax. Then it costs taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars to hire the bureaucrats to take our money and send some of it back. So Canadians understand that there is no way that a government can charge a carbon tax, charge its sales tax on top of a carbon tax, skim some money off the top, and then somehow make everyone better off with rebates. It's impossible, and Canadians get it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And the thing is that Canadians are getting wise to just what a boondoggle this is. And you guys, like I was saying, you've been very strong advocates in this space. And I know you commissioned a leisure poll there not too long ago as well. This poll is coming back. It says more than 2/3, 69% of Canadians oppose the federal government increasing the carbon tax. So there is universal opposition to this, it seems, across the board. And what did you say, 7 premiers now? Where do you think all of this is coming from?
Where is it coming from? Well, the fact that Canadians' lives are becoming increasingly more expensive. People are fed up. But not only that, people also understand that the carbon tax isn't going to solve a global environmental issue, right? Let's just take the federal government at its word. Okay, well, hold on a second. What they are failing to realize is that fueling up your sedan to get the kids to school, or keeping the heat on during the winter, or fueling up big rigs, or fueling up your diesel truck, or going to the grocery store, those are necessities for countless Canadians. So all the carbon tax does is leave people with less money in their budgets or their pockets to pay for the other necessities of life, like sending their kids off to college or university, right? But not only that, Canada makes up 1.5% of global emissions. Guess what? About 3/4 of countries don't have a national carbon tax. The United States doesn't have a national carbon tax. Democrat President Joe Biden isn't going to bring in a national carbon tax. So all that this federal carbon tax is doing is making it more expensive to live in Canada and isn't doing anything to help the environment.
Right. And BC has had a carbon tax for a hell of a lot longer than Canada, even so much as proposed it. And, the weather didn't change there. And in fact, it seems emissions have gone up, and they didn't even reinvest any of that stuff into things like water bombers, to combat these intensifying fire seasons that seem to be attributed to climate change as well. And I'm just showing a graphic here because you're making a really good point about just the level of emissions. Like, we're Canada as a country, we can tax ourselves into poverty, but we still only make up 1.5% of all emissions worldwide. The United States, just south of the 49, they're at 13.5%. So they're 9 times the amount of emissions that we have here in Canada. And like you said, Joe Biden is not imposing a carbon tax there. But the really big issue on this one, I think, is that it's going to be in Asia, right? China's at 30.9% of global emissions. So really, like, at the end of the day, no matter how much we tax Canadians, and no matter how little carbon they actually emit, it's still only 1.5% of global emissions. So it's a drop in the bucket. And if you accept that carbon is driving climate change, then you still can't get to any kind of a reasonable conclusion that Canada is a driving force in that, given the major emitters elsewhere in the world, right?
Jeff, it's even worse than that. It's even worse than that, right? Because think about what happens when Canada imposes heavy regulations, heavy taxes on energy, and doesn't allow major projects to get built in Canada. Well, what happens? You drive that production to other countries that aren't as environmentally conscious as Canadians are. So not only does it not help this environmental challenge that the government is, that's the whole rationale that they give publicly, right? So not only does it not help, you could be making things worse by driving away investment, driving away jobs, driving away tax dollars away from Canada and to other countries, right? And here, let me just hammer home another talking point of the federal government. They are essentially claiming that this is a redistribution scheme with the rebates, right? And that's their claim, that'll mostly hurt rich people and it'll help lower income people. That's their claim, but they are wrong. They're right that is a redistribution scheme, but they're wrong because it is not hurting the rich multinationals and helping poor people or lower income people. That's not the redistribution. The redistribution are from people who have to fuel up their truck with diesel when they go to work every morning to people who work in office buildings. That's the redistribution scheme, right? The redistribution is from people who learned how to swing a hammer for work to people who learn how to hit send on an email for work. That is what's going on here. And you're also punishing certain regions of Canada. Like, my whole family lives in Southern Alberta. I spent my formative years in Calgary. And I can tell you right now how damaging these energy taxes, these energy regulations, these laws like Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, I can tell you how that impacts so devastatingly certain regions in Canada. Like, I remember 2014, the end of 2014, early 2015, just how bad it was in Alberta. Right now, this was before the federal carbon tax, granted, but the federal government continued to pile on regulations and taxes that made that recovery much, much harder. But for years, I remember hearing of hundreds of layoffs. I remember seeing people leaving office buildings crying, holding boxes. And this Ottawa bubble has no idea, or maybe they do, I don't know what's worse, but has no idea how their taxes, overregulation, and bad policies is just destroying so many people's lives.
Yeah, or maybe that's the point. I've been speculating on that a little bit too. It just seems to be whatever makes life harder, whatever weakens, Canada is going to make its way into the agenda here. There seems to be just like, it's not just the carbon tax. It's not just the idea that the have-nots are having to pay more for the have-yachts, as Polyev has been branding it. I mean, he's been doing some pretty decent branding around this recently. But across the board, it seems to be the case that they're just pocketing a lot of this cash. And I know you guys are following this as well. But here's this is the taxpayers, Canadian Taxpayers Federation website there, guys. I have it in the ticker at the bottom. It's www.taxpayer.com. And they put out a lot of good articles from their newsroom here as well. It says ArriveScam execs got $340,000 in bonuses. Federal health executives responsible for the ArriveScam app received $340,000 in bonuses, according to government records obtained by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So well done, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, for going after that. But do you want to maybe fill us in on some of the detail around that there, Franco?
Hey, Jeff, I absolutely want to talk about how the federal government is handing out taxpayers' money to bureaucrats who fail in forms of bonuses. But before we do that, I'm not trying to skate around the issue. I really want to get into that. But can we talk about the other things the federal government is doing that is making people's lives more expensive? Just because you rightly pointed out that there's much more than just the carbon tax. So what happened during the pandemic, right? Massive lockdowns slowed the economy down. But how did the federal government finance its deficits? With the money printer. The Bank of Canada printed hundreds of billions of dollars to buy government bonds. And the more dollars a central bank prints out of thin air, the less that your dollars can buy, right? And you hear politicians say, well, other countries are experiencing inflation too. Well, when other countries run these massive deficits and print a whole bunch of money, guess what happens? And the Bank of Canada absolutely printed up hundreds of billions of dollars during the pandemic year, a massive explosion in their balance sheet, so to speak, okay? All of it, not with money that they had, but with a click of the keypad, right? And to break this down, folks, right, a central bank can create dollars out of thin air, but you can't just create new homes out of thin air. You can't just create food out of thin air. All of that takes time. So what happened during those years of 2020, 21, 22, 23, et cetera, is that you had the Bank of Canada print all this new money out of thin air. And then for many of those years, you had revolving government lockdowns that reduced people's ability to make stuff. So you end up with the perfect storm of inflation, which is too many dollars chasing too few goods.
And on the inflation note, said, and you would know this better than I would, but it's interesting to me how they calculate inflation, and they're telling us that it's about 3% right now, and it's better than elsewhere. But if inflation is supposed to be a metric by which to measure purchasing power of your dollars, then it's rather telling, I think, that they don't include things in that calculation like housing and food and fuel, at least as I understand it. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they certainly include some of that stuff for sure, right? Like energy costs make up a huge part of the inflation numbers. But the real issue is that all this inflation number is a percentage increase in prices. Okay, so when you see headlines like you probably did yesterday saying that inflation is cooling or inflation comes down, all that means is that prices are still going up. They're just not going up as fast or as much as they did last year. Right. Okay, so it's not like prices are coming down. That's not what that means. It means prices shot up in 2022. If I'm not mistaken, 2022 was like a 40-year high. And then prices also went up in 2023. And then prices are also going up again in 2024, just less fast or less high as they did in previous years. But every year, prices go up and up and up. That is the real issue when you see these types of headlines.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what I was kind of driving at there too, because there are some commodities I think that aren't included in the calculation for, and housing in particular. Am I wrong about that? Feel free to correct me if I am.
Honestly, Jeff, I'm not sure. I don't know what exact basket of goods that they're including. So I'm sorry, guys.
No worries. Yeah, I appreciate the commentary and and the thing is, so they're squeezing us of all of our wealth. And you mentioned the lockdowns and the impact that had. So they essentially shut down the small business sector. So you couldn't buy your barbecue at Adamson's Barbecue in the small business sector, but you could go up the street and buy some ribs at Costco. So in the corporate sector. So they basically squeeze the little guy in favor of transferring all that wealth into the corporate their corporate crony pockets, and also at the same time there's these corporations, like there's this merger that's happening between the corporations and the state where there's all this contracting taking place. And they're basically shoveling money out the door to their corporate cronies, and we're getting no return on investment for it. And I would point to examples like ArriveScam, and there was a lot around the ventilators. The company that never made any ventilators. What are you tracking on that front?
Okay, so this is a perfect time, I guess, to get into the ArriveScam, right, and the bonuses. So it started out with an initial cost of $80,000. $80,000, okay, for a simple app. And then a couple years later, we hear the cost has somehow shot up to like 20 million. That's insane, right? And then a couple months after that, we hear the costs are like $54 million. And then some independent techies thought this was so outrageous that they recreated the app over a long weekend, over a Thanksgiving long weekend. They recreated the app. Other tech experts said it should have cost to develop like $250,000. And yet taxpayers, according to the Auditor General, are now on the hook for at least $60 million for this app. Okay? So imagine this, folks. Like, imagine you take your car to a mechanic for a simple fix. The mechanic initially says, Dad, don't worry about it. It's going to be $80. Then you go back, or you get a call, and they're like, nah, it's $2,000. And then you finally get the receipt back to pick up your car. You get the invoice. It's actually $6,000, and everything is redacted. Like, you would be furious, and rightfully so. But that's how the government treated taxpayers on this, okay? And not only that, but as we dug up, the government still handed out $340,000 in bonuses to the executive government bureaucrats who were overseeing ArriveScam. And like, Jeff, like, my question is, like, was nobody in the bureaucracies like raising their hand when the cost went from $80,000 to $800,000 to $1 million to $20 million to $60 million? Like, what is going on there? And then who is going to be held accountable for this? Because right now, it just seems like instead of actual accountability, it's just, hey, you showed up for work, here's a bonus. And this is happening, like these bonuses that are being funded by the taxpayer for failing government bureaucrats, Jeff, it's happening all across the federal government.
Yep. And speaking of that, here's Michael Barrett, and he's tweeting out a quick clip here from, it's about 1:20, from some testimony given on the ArriveScam and the double dipping that's taking place. This is Dalian CEO got a consulting contract from Trudeau officials the same day he was hired as a bureaucrat. So let's check this out.
On what date did you start your employment with the Government of Canada?
Mr. Chair, the Government of Canada start date was the 19th of September, 2023.
Okay, I'll circle back to that. On what date were you first employed in any capacity with the Government of Canada, including in the Canadian Armed Forces?
That would be start date of December 17th, 1987.
Have you been employed by any other departments other than as a regular reserve member of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defense?
So The short answer is no, but I'm assuming that you're talking about my consulting work.
We'll get to that. Okay. You mentioned the date of September 19th, 2023. That was the date that you said what happened?
That was the date that I started as a public service employee.
And did anything else happen on that date that's noteworthy for the work of this committee?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
So we have in the documents that the committee has received, it says that that the department signed a contract with you on that very same date. So I find that interesting that on September 19th of 2023, you were both awarded a contract and awarded a job in the public service.
Odious Patton is saying Yao is a yo-yo. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, so obvious conflicts of interest, I think. They seem pretty obvious to me, but it's sort of lost on the federal bureaucrats that they can't be benefiting from contracts while they hold positions in the federal government with contract awarding power. So that's another theme I think we're sort of seeing in terms of the corruption across the board. Hey, Franco?
Jeff, you know what I'm kind of worried about from this ArriveScam scandal? I'm worried that the coverage, and I'm not even saying it's wrong for the coverage to be looking at these individuals and some of the other individuals that, got a bunch of money, turned around, and then just contracted out the work, right? I think, I'll leave it up to the legal beagles, law enforcement to figure out like who should be held accountable on the legal front. But what I worry about is that we're kind of losing sight of the bigger picture here. And the bigger picture isn't just ArriveScam. This is a debacle and people should be held accountable. And they definitely shouldn't be getting bonuses in government when they're overseeing this. But what is going to stop this from happening again? Like, what actual changes within government is going to stop this from happening again? Because you're always going to see, and I'm not even saying it's right, but you're always going to see companies or individuals try to maximize what they can get given the rules. So what rules and safeguards are actually going to be put in place within the government to make sure stuff like this doesn't happen again? Like, how in the government are we going to make sure that bureaucrats that we're overseeing or that were a part of this ArriveScam debacle, how are we going to make sure that they're not getting bonuses and that they're actually held accountable? And what I'm also worried about here is that, look, ArriveScam is one story of this, right? And the only reason we know about it is because you have some reporters and journalists and members of parliament who've been digging this up. But my worry is that this is one app. How much of this is going on throughout the entire bureaucracy? And what is a politician or the government going to do to make sure that taxpayers aren't getting soaked across the board?
Yeah, great question. And I'm not holding my breath on that accountability. I mean, I think it will come eventually, but it's going to take a concerted effort on the part of a lot of Canadians over an extended period of time before we really see that. And speaking of that kind of corruption that seems to be coming from the top and just this rotten culture I think we see in the bureaucracy. Here's another exchange here, Michael Barrett, and he has Michael Wernick in the hot seat. And Michael Wernick was the clerk of the Privy Council office, the first one in Canadian history to resign in disgrace over the Jody Wilson-Raybould affair there. So I think that this is pretty emblematic of what we see going on in the federal bureaucracy these days. Not a lot of desire to hold the institutions to account, but rather they tend to be of a mindset that it's more about the outward facing optics than it is about cleaning up the inward facing processes and practices. But here we go.
As someone who specializes in governance, what do you think about cabinet confidence being used to hide wrongdoing and shield members of the executive from effective investigation by police?
If that was the case, then that's not a very good idea. Not a good thing.
So we've had the RCMP before parliamentary committees tell us that they have not been able to productively pursue investigations because of the executive's refusal to waive cabinet confidence. So you would characterize that as what you said, not very good?
Depends what the confidences in question were and what they would have led to.
I think that we know that in these cases they would have led to charges being laid against Justin Trudeau, and that's why
that's your hypothesis. We don't know. I don't know what was redacted, what was withheld, and what was produced.
Indeed, we don't know, because the executive has used their power. The Prime Minister has used his power to shield himself from effective investigation by police. It creates a real problem when we don't know what we don't know. We don't know. We don't have anyone who watches the watchers, including our federal police. And on that, in a previous response, you said that when politicians start meddling in the justice system, it's not full democracy, it's authoritarianism. But that's what we saw with SNC Lavalin, isn't that right?
Well, where was the interference with the justice system?
Well, sir, welcome back from 2019. I know that you had a front row seat at the time. We had the Prime Minister who was found to have used his influence to pressure the Attorney General. That's a finding of an independent officer of Parliament. That's not my opinion. We know this to be a fact, and we know that you, sir, on doing the Prime Minister's bidding, doing Justin Trudeau's bidding, in an extended phone call, put tremendous pressure on then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to do exactly what the Prime Minister wanted, and that was to give a deferred prosecution agreement, or for the uninitiated, effectively a get-out-of-jail free card for a liberal-friendly firm, friends of the Prime Minister. And that's pressure. And what happened when Ms. Wilson-Raybould didn't do what she was supposed to do in the Prime Minister's estimation? She was kicked out of cabinet. And when someone spoke up on her behalf, they were kicked out of cabinet in Dr. Philpott. And for their dissent, they were both ejected from caucus. So it seems like that's a pretty heavy hammer the Prime Minister was able to carry. And what did he do? He put in a justice minister who would do what he wanted to have done, to do his bidding. That is, as you described it, authoritarian, because that's exactly the kind of interference in the justice system that happens in tin pot dictatorships.
So that's one narrative. Another narrative would be that the maximum pressure put on the Attorney General was to provide reasoning and rationale why she declined to use a tool, an entirely legal tool that was provided by Cabinet, the Deferred Prosecution Agreement, which was made available for certain cases. Deferred prosecution agreements are not an illegal act. They are a legal tool. It's how we got the two Michaels back from China.
Yeah, no one has said that a DPA is illegal. What we're saying is that the Prime Minister inappropriately interfered in the administration of justice in this country. And someone who would be willing to do that can't be trusted to, of course, protect themselves from prosecution by the RCMP for obstruction of justice using powers of the executive. That's blatant interference. Do you have any regrets about how Jody Wilson-Raybould was treated?
Not every issue of ethics or behavior rises to the level of a breach of criminal law. That is why Parliament created a conflict of interest and ethics commission.
Regrets, sir. Do you have regrets about how Ms. Wilson-Raybould was treated?
I have no regrets about anything that happened. We all made our best decisions at the time with the information we had, everybody involved in the affair.
Okay, so I think I really like the comment there about there's nobody watching the watchers. That seems to be the case right now. So how do we move forward in cleaning up this mess there, Franco?
All of us, Canadians. It's that, like, that's the answer. Unfortunately, political incentives are in place where, okay, let me just backtrack for a second, right? I still mean what I say, where how do we move forward? Like, there is no one political person. There is no one political party. No matter how much you might like someone who's running for office, there is no one person who is going to be perfect. And there definitely isn't one person who's going to be perfect for the entire time they're there. There is no silver bullet outside of just constant vigilance and constant pressure from Canadians. That it's not an easy answer to give, and I wish I had a better answer, but that is the answer, right? Like, that is the answer. And I'll even just go back to like what I said earlier about the carbon tax. I've been fighting this carbon tax for so long. I've actually spent almost my entire career fighting this carbon tax for years. Even when conservatives were running on a carbon tax, that wasn't that long ago. And the only thing that pushed all of these politicians from all of the political parties across Canada to speak out against the carbon tax was the pressure created from Canadians, right? Like, that is what is leading to this change. That is what's happening. So you ask, like, how can we improve things? Yeah, look, there's some good politicians out there. I believe they probably have their hearts in the right place, but you can't rely on any one person to go in there and fix everything, right? Like here's a good example. I saw someone comment, I don't trust 338 of them. Well, let me kind of talk about something going on, right? You know, on April 1, not only is the carbon tax going up, but MP pay, I'm glad you brought that up, is increasing from about $8,000 to an extra $16,000. And guess what? When you hear Ottawa say, or politicians say, we're all in this together, it turns out what they mean is not us taxpayers. They mean the gang of 338 of them here in Ottawa. Because guess what? The silence from every political party on the MP pay raise has been deafening. Now, I have to watch this for a living, right? Political discourse. Maybe I missed it. I don't know. But I haven't seen one member of parliament speak out against the upcoming pay raise. Not one. I haven't heard one. And like, let me just tell you folks, like, what the salaries are going to be after this raise if it does go through. A backbench member of parliament will be collecting about $202,000 in salary. Okay. A minister will be collecting just shy of 300 grand. Prime minister's salary after the raise will be $405,000. But Jeff, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because guess what? This raise has been going on year after year after year after year. Since the beginning of 2020, folks, this will be their 5th pay raise. Now, what has happened since 2020? Lockdowns, job losses, businesses closing down, a housing crisis, food bank lines. So long, right? But that didn't stop any of them from taking raise after raise after raise after raise. And this is why I say there are some good politicians out there. Many of them say good stuff a lot of the time, right? But you can't just rely on politicians. Canadians have to stay engaged and stay on top of them. So who watches the watchers? It has to be us.
Yeah, I do agree 1,000%, and that's been a lot of what I've been saying around here too. Like it's going to take it's us. We all got to get engaged. I think we've been kind of taking it for granted for too long that we can just kind of trust that the institutions will keep things in order, and everything will continue to improve, and quality of life will go up, this kind of thing. But it doesn't just happen. It really does take everybody getting involved. So I guess what kind of next steps are we seeing anyway, and what is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, what kind of like initiatives are they pursuing? Are you guys pursuing right now in terms of keeping that pressure on the politicians? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so everything for me over the next couple weeks is everything to oppose the carbon tax hike, the MP pay raise, and the alcohol tax hike happening on April the 1st. That's all I'm focusing on. We'll put out a couple more investigative stories about government wasteful spending, but my 24 hours, or as however long I'm up in the day, which is thankfully less than 24, is all focused on fighting this carbon tax, fighting the MP pay raise, and fighting the alcohol tax, man. And here's why: because so many people work so hard for their money, people are already stretched so thin right now, and there's no reason that taxes have to keep going up and up and up. So every waking work hour, that's my focus. Stop the tax hikes, stop the pay raise. After that, April 16th is the federal budget. So it'll quickly shift in the next couple weeks from after opposing this tax hikes, continue to talk about it all the time, continue to raise awareness, try to mobilize Canadians around the tax and pay raises into the federal budget, which I think is going to be a bit of a disaster. But hey, let me leave you guys with some optimism, because I know I've been a bit of a rain cloud, today. But some optimism. Like we talked about the poll earlier, where the vast majority of Canadians in every province, in every demographic, is against the carbon tax hike, right? But not only that, I saw a poll, I think it was either for Bloomberg, I might have seen it in the Financial Post, but that like almost 2/3 of Canadians want spending cuts. Like that is a huge poll number, like a huge poll number. So I honestly feel like Canadians are getting engaged. Canadians are seeing what's going on, and Canadians are really starting to get fed up by the way our federal government treats us by raising taxes like crazy, printing a whole bunch of money, and then also just spending and wasting money like crazy. Oh, and I see one of your viewers. Thank you so much for that. Taxpayer.com, folks. You can head over there. Also to sign the petitions, and like if you're against the carbon tax, sign the carbon tax petition. And it's not only do we deliver petitions to politicians, but once you sign up and if you provide your email, we'll let you know when we're mobilizing, right? Like when there's good opportunities for you to take action to push back against some of those issues.
Yeah, sounds great. Everybody, check out the ticker there. I have the website up there. It's www.taxpayer.com. This is what I have up on the screen here right now. And as you can see, they have multiple petitions on their homepage. There's the no automatic tax filing petition, as well as the carbon taxes off farm fuels petition, defund the CBC and end media bailouts. And they have a merch store too, if you want to check that out. So like great initiatives, I think, very important work. And Franco, like you're obviously a force to be reckoned with in all of this. So we really appreciate what you're doing, man. And thanks a lot for taking the time to come and speak with us. I'll just hand it over to you for a final word here before we let you get back to the important work that you're doing. Please go ahead.
Well, I just want to say thank you. Taxpayer.com is our website. You can follow us on pretty much all social media. Just search Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you want to follow me on Twitter at Franco_nomics. And one last call to action, folks. In literally a couple hours, members of Parliament are going to vote on whether to increase the carbon tax on April 1. So if you're thinking about writing an email, if you're thinking about phoning an MP, now is the time to do it, okay? So that's just my last little call to action for everyone out there. You have like 2 hours before the vote.
All right. Sounds great, man. And everybody should take this advice to heart, I think. Again, I'll just say that I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And it was a real pleasure getting to hang out with you for a little bit while we're down in Washington there. So important to take that time out as well. So thanks again, Franco, and keep up the good work, man.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. See ya.
All right. Take care. Okay, guys. So that brings us to the end of our broadcast for today. Here is the Veterans for Freedom website. Go and check us out there at v4f.ca. Subscribe to our newsletter by clicking subscribe here. Join Veterans for Freedom if you're a veteran by clicking join here. And support Veterans for Freedom by clicking support here. You can donate to us directly to help with our operational costs, like the website and my StreamYard account, or you can also click support, and that'll take you to the Veterans for Freedom Support Fund page. Everybody who donates gets a chance to vote on where the pool of donations goes at the end of every month. This month's candidates are Carrie Sakamoto, who was on the program here last week discussing the horrible vaccine injury that she got. She's quadriplegic now. And we've already gotten her a wheelchair, an electric wheelchair that you can use. And now the service dog was just announced yesterday. And the next phase of Carrie's GoFundMe campaign, her Give Send Go, is up. So we're moving to the next phase of that. Really worthy cause there. And also we have Chris Lysak, who is a returning contestant, needs no introduction, probably the most famous of the Coots 4. So he's another contender for the funds this month, as is Lisa Robinson, returning contender, Heartless Pickering city councillor who has been sanctioned 90 days wages for standing up for her constituents in all of this tyranny. And she's a single mom too, so she could really use the help. And also you'll have the option to send 10% of your donation to Quilts of Valor, which we all appreciate out in the veteran community here. I got my Quilt of Valor a couple of years ago there, just before I retired, and it was really touching gesture, and they're really nice quilts. So sign up for a subscription by clicking one of the buttons here with monthly donation from your credit card. If you don't want to use your credit card, you can send your e-transfer to fund@veteransforfreedom.ca. That's fund@veterans4freedom.ca. If you And if you are unable to put the auto deposit on, then please use the password fund number 4 freedom. That's all caps fund number 4 freedom, and we'll make sure that gets off to a worthy cause. And to round things out, that brings us all the way back to Ayn Rand, who says, in a fully free society, taxation, or to be exact, payment for governmental services would be voluntary. Yeah, that I think is a good metric by which to measure just how free we are. You know, and if I had my way, I'd get rid of the income tax. That's something that really only came into effect in Canada in 1917 to pay for the war, the First World War, and it stayed on for the Second World War, and it just never went away. You know, if we're going to do an income tax, then in light of how it came into existence, it should probably be to pay for the military and maybe the federal police forces. So it's like a security tax, something like that. And anything beyond that, I mean, I don't see, there's not a whole lot of services that the government could provide that wouldn't be better served by the private sector, and therefore we would enter into those agreements voluntarily. So yeah, I think that the aspiration is pretty good in terms of having no taxation whatsoever. Ultimately, we're probably going to need some of it just to pay for militaries and stuff like that. But wouldn't it be better? I mean, I'm looking at free trade these days. That was another thing that Brian Mulrooney brought in. And I'm going, is this really working for everybody, or did you just make a bunch of boomers rich? And so maybe we'd be better off, you know, just taxing mega corporations who want to exploit our resources and set up shop here, and taking more from that side of things, as opposed to squeezing our own citizens. I'll bet you we could take a huge step in the right direction if we went back to doing something like taxing imports instead of taxing labor. As you know, my own productivity gets taxed, and it disincentivizes productivity, right, at the end of the day, in income tax. So that's my rant about income tax, and it was real fun talking to Franco there, and we had a really good time down in DC at the CPAC conference there about a month ago now. Yeah, Franco's a really great guy, and a hard fighter out there, really sharp, as you can see. So I appreciate what he's doing. It'd be great to have him back on the regular. And I'll throw out a few comments before I sign off here, guys. Here's Stephanie saying, "You're doing great, kid." I'm not going to do the voice because I know Jeremy's much better with voices than I am. So Darlene says, "Exactly, Jeff," and agreed, Jeff, says Cindy. So I think you guys are agreeing with me when it comes to the issue of taxation. Taxation is theft. At the end of the day, and we should call it like it is. So it's really a question of how much theft is absolutely necessary to maintain a modern state and a civil society. And Vince is saying, yes, taxes was to be temporary. My father taught me this years ago. Yeah, but there's no such thing as a temporary power once acquired by government, is there? And Colleen is saying, don't you just love it when they say paid for by the government? Yeah, that's us. The government doesn't produce anything. It doesn't have any money. It just takes our money and spends it. Okay, that's it for me, guys. So thanks for tuning in. And until next time, stay frosty and stay safe.
Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs.